All right. That is my clue, my cue to start us up. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. It is a pleasure to be here. My name is David Irvine. For those of you who don't know me, I very much appreciate you coming and investing in our community here. This is not just a presentation. It's really, we're building a community. And here's how it works. I talk for about an hour. And I give you some ideas. And then for those of you who can stay on, we stay on for an extra half an hour. If you're able, many are obviously need to get off right on the hour, but no problem if you have to jump off. But if you can stay on, we'll be having you turn on your videos, and hopefully we can have some conversation about what you're taking away from this. And I hope my intention is to use that extra half an hour too to get the wisdom of the group. So I'm not the smartest person in the room here. In fact, quite the opposite. I'm just going to give you my philosophy and approach to accountability. And I'd love to hear what yours are and what your reaction is. So let's get right into it. We've got a very short amount of time here. This is ordinarily a full day program that I offer, so you're going to get a condensed version. Tackling the tough accountability conversations. We have all had these tough accountability conversations when people aren't meeting our expectations. One of the things I'm going to be asking you is, what is your process for managing expectations in your workplace, in your family, in your community association, wherever you are, as I often say, life would be a whole lot easier if it wasn't for other people. But we all have expectations of people. How do we manage those expectations? What's that process? So essentially what we're going to do today, we're going to do two things. Yes, I want to give you some clues at how to manage that process, but you got to get the philosophy first. If you're having difficulty with accountability and you're frustrated, we've all been there. Frustrated, somebody's not meeting our expectations. Someone's not coming through. Someone's not doing what they say they're going to do. Yes, we have to have those brave conversations, but those are what I call downstream problems. And the philosophy and the approach to accountability is an upstream solution. So many times we end up with problems downstream because we haven't done the work upstream. And so that's what the philosophy is. And that's what we are going to focus on in the course of the presentation. So I'm going to submit for your consideration. Accountability isn't just a transaction. It's not just a check the box activity. It's not just a transactional activity. It actually impacts your mental health. It'll impact your relationships, and it'll impact the results that you get in those relationships. I'm going to build a case for that, set the foundation for the first half an hour, and then we're going to spend the last half an hour on the relationship and the actual process piece. So let me just give you a little bit of background on my story. I first came into awareness around accountability when I was a family therapist back in the 1980s. Very interesting when you're a family therapist. Nobody ever brings in their good kids, unfortunately, because sometimes the good kids are the ones that exhibit some of the problems in the family. However, I digress. So I started to think about accountability when I started to do presentations for parents back in the 1980s. And what I ended up doing was presenting a philosophy around raising accountable kids. I knew that the fundamental issue with raising kids was building accountability, and it was a hot topic back in those days, as it still is today. And here's a very quick summary of my philosophy: is that we got to support kids, but we also have to push kids. And oftentimes, if we've grown up in a family where we had too many demands, then we parent in a way that says, I'm not going to raise my kids the way that I was raised. And so we over support. And we have a whole generation now of families that are over supporting your kids. And you constantly have to walk this line between, do my kids need support or do they need to be pushed? And honestly, I don't know that we need to push kids as much as we just need to make sure that we don't have life. We don't have to rescue them from the push of life. Life will push them. So this is what I would teach parents. And what I would say is, if you over support kids and do too much for kids and over coddle them, what happens is that you get two things. First of all, you get entitlement, which is what Brene Brown would say, I deserve something just because I want it. And you also get anxiety that comes from a lack of confidence in one's ability to deal with the demands of life. This is the consequence of too much demand, or too much support, rather. Now, you don't want too much demand. Those are the old days. right? Where kids were strapped and weren't heard and weren't listened to. So somehow or other, we have to balance this. Well, I had business executives, organizational leaders come to my parenting talks and said, well, you should come and present this to our organization, the same philosophy, because it's not just a family philosophy, it's a parenting, it's a leadership philosophy. We need to support people, but we need to push people. And, you know, that for me, if you've been around me, I talk a lot about the relational component, but you also have to have the push part in relationships. And these are the tough conversations that we're going to talk about. Anyway, back in the 90s, we wrote this book called Accountability, Get a Grip on Results. And this is really what launched my career. If you were in the oil patch in Calgary in the 90s in one of the top 10 oil companies, you'd have been familiar with our book. It took my philosophy around ownership and personal responsibility, and we integrated it into Bruce and Sean's process. And they had both collectively probably 40 years of experience inside of oil companies, and we integrated that together. However, we did have a falling out later in the 90s. It was a respectful falling out, but it became such a transaction. And, you know, we made a whack of money just selling this performance management accountability system to large companies, but it became too transactional for me. And I said, there has to be an integration between accountability and authenticity. You can't just have this checkbox. You can't just have a transactional aspect to accountability. You got to have a relational aspect to it. So I integrated it into my most recent book, my work around accountability, and integrated it into authenticity. But for today, what we're really going to talk about is the difference between authenticity and accountability. Now, you know, those being around me for a while know that the central part of my work is authenticity. But below the surface of authenticity is accountability. These are the root. This is the root of your life. Now, authenticity without accountability without authenticity is drudgery. We don't want anybody on our headstone. We want on our gravesite. We don't want, well, the person showed up and was accountable. Well, that's a means to a higher end, but it is a fundamental. It's the foundation of our life. It's the foundation of organizations. And you can't, authenticity without accountability is fantasy. It's not sustainable. You have to have the roots of good, strong accountability. Okay, so that's really what we're going to focus on today. So what the philosophy deals with is the power of keeping agreements, the power of citizenship through ownership, and the power of generosity. People who are accountable tend to be much more generous, and they're much more giving oriented, and they're much more of a giver in organizations. So the accountability, the ability to be counted on. Now that's pretty straightforward. Henry Ford, you can't build a reputation on what you're going to do. It's really the foundation of your reputation and what your self-respect is. So this is how this works, the philosophy. When you honor your agreements, you have what we call integrity. Relational integrity. Now there's moral integrity, which is another aspect, which we won't go down that road today, but you get relational integrity. And with integrity comes self-respect, and with respect comes respect for others. And with respect from others, it increases energy. Just stop for a minute and think about the 5 people in your life that you can count on. If there's 3, 5, 8 people that you can count on. And what's it like to be around those people? When they say they're going to do something, you can count on it. I can tell you my vice president of client care is on the call right now, and she's helping me out today, Marg Barr. And let me tell you, it's energizing to work with her because you know you can count on her. If she will make a promise, if she makes a promise, you know you can count on it. Now, she will say no, but then you know you can count on the no. If you can't say no, you can't count on the yes. So you can tell, and it's energizing to be around people. And what I would first of all encourage you to do is, if you want to build accountability, build it with a flashlight, not a stick. Don't walk around beating people up because they're not accountable. Start with a flashlight and shine a light on when people are accountable. I'd have people make a list of the people you can count on in your life. Ask yourself what it's like to be around those people. Give them a call today when we're done the webinar. Give them a call and say, I just want you to know you're on my list. Now you want to tell them you might want to tell them what list they're on, but we need to reinforce what it's like to be around people you can count on, because it builds self-respect and respect from others. Now, the interesting and fascinating thing, and this is where it's related to mental health, and I'll tell you, this was transformational for me when I started to teach organizations about accountability, is because this relates to being accountable to yourself. So take an agreement for yourself. And let's just take, for the sake of simplicity's sake here, let's just say you make an agreement with yourself to get up and exercise in the morning. And you make an agreement at 9 o'clock at night. Now, integrity means when that alarm clock goes off at 6 o'clock in the morning, you're going to go to the gym. This is not the time to not go to the gym. This is not the time to decide. You've made a decision at 9 o'clock at night, and you have integrity by getting up. And we've all experienced the integrity of getting up and doing something hard in the morning, whether it's going to the gym, going for a walk, getting up and doing a discipline that's important. Maybe it's having quiet time, whatever it is. But when you keep a promise, as my dad would say, it's mind over mattress. When that alarm clock goes off, you don't decide then. You don't decide whether I don't know if I feel like going to a gym today or not. No, you go to the gym whether you feel like it or not. And what that earns is it earns self-respect. It gives you a sense of self-respect. If you've had the experience of doing something hard in the morning, and then you feel better about yourself an hour from now, we know the impact of, we call that exercise endorphins, but I'm going to suggest it's the endorphins that can come from integrity. You showed up, and that produces energy in yourself. You will start your day with energy when you do something hard. Now, I'm not suggesting that you have to exercise in order to have accountability. But what I do know is that you need to know what's important to yourself. You make an agreement and you keep it. Now, maybe you say rest is more important than exercise. No problem. Then I'm going to get to bed on time and I'm going to sleep in. Now you can keep your integrity because you kept a promise to yourself. And that's the point that we're trying to make here. And what I've discovered is this was really impacting my own mental health. I have a propensity toward getting depressed. And my dad suffered from depression. I have had to deal with it. And one of the ways that I have learned to increase my self-respect is by learning how to practice accountability, keeping a promise to myself and having integrity in my life. A private victory, as Steve Covey used to say, precedes a public victory. You act your way into right feelings. You don't feel your way into right actions. And what I discovered is that by teaching people accountability and by working with accountability inside of organizations, I realized I need to have integrity in my own life. And I needed to go and get some help because I suffered from an addiction, and I needed to go and get some help. And in a recovery process, I learned that this principle, that you don't wait to feel good. What you do is take the action, and the feelings are an outcome of the action. And, I now work 20 hours a week with addicts, volunteering my time with addicts. And what I'm realizing is that addicts are doing is they're actually recovering their integrity. When you're held in the grips of an addiction, you have no integrity, and thus you have no self-respect. You wake up and say, hey, you know what? I'm gonna stay sober today. I'm not gonna drink anything today. By 4 o'clock, you're drunk. What happens to your self-respect? It's down the toilet. So you get into a program that says, you know what? You're gonna hold yourself accountable. And what I have found is that recovering addicts are actually recovering their self-respect. They're saying, we work a program and we hold ourselves accountable, that it doesn't matter how you feel, you're gonna have a program and a community that's gonna hold you accountable for being sober today. And what you end up with is, at the end of the day, some self-respect. And what that does is earns respect from other people, and you gain energy from doing that. If you want higher self-respect, don't do what's easy. Do what you agreed to do. Okay? So choose very carefully. Now, this has applications in organizations. This is a claim, and then you have reality. And this is like, if you want more integrity in your life, think about what your values are. What will you claim to value? Now, if you claim to value your health, and you're in reality not taking care of what you know that you need to take care of, or if you value a relationship and you're not investing in that relationship, the reality is what we have here is an integrity gap. Because it's what you value, but it's not in reality. And by the way, this happens in organizations. How many of you have seen the fancy value statements on the wall? Say, this is what we value, But this is reality. We're not really interested in living those values. We're just interested in espousing them. What you'll end up with is an integrity gap. And an integrity gap is you have a gap in self-respect, and you have a gap in, you won't respect the leaders in the organization. You won't respect yourself because you're working in an organization that isn't working toward closing that gap. The way that you close the gap is with clear agreements. So for example, if you're struggling with some self-confidence, look, this is one path to begin to have more self-respect, is to say, what do you value in your life? And maybe you say, I value my health. Now turn that value, you can say, well, I value my health. Turn that value into an agreement with yourself to say, I need more exercise, or it doesn't have to be exercise. Maybe I need more community in my life. I need better relationships. I need better support. I need more rest. I need more exercise. I need to take care of what I'm eating. Turn that gap into a very clear statement. I am going to make an agreement with myself. And when you make an agreement with yourself and then have an accountability partner, as we say, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Find a partner that you can share it with and have you hold yourself accountable and watch your self-respect increase by aligning your life with your values. And you won't ever bring them together perfectly, but as you move your claim into reality, it increases your self-respect. And this is a pathway to increase mental health. Yeah, and we don't talk enough about this in the mental health field, but I've worked so much of this on my own, and I'm anal about this. Where's the agreement? And have driven my kids crazy, but I know from my own sensitive nervous system, in order to do this work, I have to have I have a sensitive nervous system. I'm very tuned in, but to other people. But the downside to that is that I have to take care of myself. And the way that I take care of myself is not to do what's soothing, but to create a life that I don't need to escape from because I have this integrity and the self-respect that comes from that. Okay, so then that's the first part of the philosophy. The second part is the accountability mindset. Now, this sign is in the waiting room of my financial advisor. You can't control the wind, but you can direct the sail. And what she is suggesting here is that there's a philosophy in a mindset. It's an external orientation or an internal orientation. The external orientation says it's the wind that is there's no question the wind affects the sail, but you don't blame the wind or you don't hope for the wind to change. Hope, by the way, hope and hope is not a good strategy. Hope and waiting for somebody else to change are not good strategies. So this is the accountability mindset that comes with really having an internal mindset that says, it doesn't matter what the wind is, I need to find a way to direct a better sail. Back in 1913, Ella Wheeler Wilcox wrote this, and I believe those days we were much more attuned to the accountability piece. I'm not sure whether she wrote this in expression of the culture at those days, or whether they struggled with personal accountability as much as they did 100 and some years ago, or as they do today. But one ship sails east, another west, by the same winds that blow. 'Tis the set of the sails and not the gales that tells the way to go. Like the winds of the sea are the waves of time as we journey along through life. 'Tis the set of the soul that determines the goal and not the calm or the strife. This is an internal orientation that says, yeah, there's a lot of wind, but it's the set of the sail that matters. It's the set of the soul. And what this does is it creates the difference between what Peter Block would say, a consumer versus a citizen. An external orientation is an approach to life that believes that our needs are satisfied by other people's action. And rather than waiting, a citizen would say, rather than waiting for or expecting others to meet your needs, they choose to be answerable for the well-being of the whole. Now, I'm going to tell you, this is marriage counseling 101. Instead of waiting for your spouse to change, it's to say, you know what, I'm going to take ownership for this relationship and I'm going to do my part. I'm not the cause of what's happening, but I contribute to that, to the effect of what's going on in this relationship. And I'm going to do my part. And this is what an accountable mindset is. We institutionally deny the fact that each of us, through our perceptions and our choices, is actually creating the culture and the leadership that we so enjoy complaining about. It is so easy to complain, but this is not an accountable mindset. It's an escape. It's a protection from doing what we need to do. If far easier is it to complain and to blame than it is to step into personal responsibility, deciding that I have actually created the world around me, and therefore I am the one to step into healing it is the ultimate act of accountability. And what happens is the external orientation leads to complaining and blaming versus an internal orientation, which leads to a vision and courage. Okay. You know, and I really believe that the generations ahead of us, this is my parents' generation in the war, had much more clarity around this business, this work around accountability. Now, this is a very personal photo to me. This is my mother's first husband. On the second to the right, Ted Harling. This was the night before their fateful flight. They crashed, and all 5 of these crewmen were killed at the end of the war. Now, in that generation, they knew things like duty and sacrifice and selfless service, working for the greater good, loyalty and grit, because they lived, no one protected them from the demands of life. And so they weren't necessarily an authentic generation. I remember asking my dad once, did you enjoy your job? Did you like your job? And he looked at me like I had beans for brains. He said, what does liking your job have to do with anything? I got a job to do. I don't have time to ask whether I like it or not. That's not the way that we want to live. We don't want to go back to the good old days. They are just the old days. But what I do think is that there was some values in those old days that we need to get tougher and develop a greater mindset of saying, you know what? If it is to be, let it start with me. Okay. This is a guy that I have tremendous respect for. And it's an interesting quote that happened some time ago in response to the arms. When asked what impact the pace of arms deliveries had for his people and whether more lives could have been saved if the help had come sooner, Zelensky turned into introspection. Very often we look for answers in someone else, but I often look for answers in myself. See, this is an internal orientation, a self-responsible orientation. Did we do enough to get them? He said of the weapons. Did we do enough with those leaders to believe in us? Did we do enough? And then he paused and shook his head. This is a self-responsible mindset. This is a mindset that says, I am creating the world around me and I am the one to step into healing it. Okay. And then what I do with organizations is make this very practical. And we talk about the victim box. And I talk about the renter versus an owner. The renter is the external orientation. We all get into this victim box, but we talk about designing ways that we hold ourselves accountable. And no, you're in the victim box. Now, for some people, it's they use the language below the line. Whatever you want to use, it's just helpful to have a language. When we drift into that victim box, it's not my job. I don't own my job. I'm just renting it. It's my responsibility. We talk about people versus talking about solutions, gossip versus showing loyalty in people's absence, finger pointing, blaming versus taking ownership, waiting to be told versus taking initiative, covering up our mistakes, stuck in the past, entitlement or gratitude. We all get trapped in here. I always said about my kids, when they came home and said their teacher sucked, I always would shake my head and say, listen, I'd give them a little bit of support for a minute. And then I would say, listen, sucking is not an adjective. I don't know a lot about English, but it's not an adjective. It's a verb. I said, sucking is part of a good life. We come into the world sucking. I said, what exactly did they suck from? So they know that they didn't get reinforcement to stay in the victim box. So this is a useful tool to help realize this. And then My final piece around the mindset is the Q12 index. Now, this is just a summary, a simplified version of the Q12 index. This is public domain. You can just Google Q12. It's a Gallup research that has identified 12 key indicators of whether an employee is going to be engaged in their work. Do I know what's expected in the last 7 days? Have you received recognition or praise for doing good work? Does your supervisor, someone at work, seem to care about you as a person? Is there someone at work who encourages your development? Does the mission or purpose of your organization make you feel that your job is important? Do you have a best friend at work? In the last year, have you had opportunities to learn and grow? Now, this is a typical employee engagement survey, right? And if you're in a position of leadership, these are good questions to ask. But implied in this, and this is rampant in our society, is an external orientation. Somebody else is responsible for your well-being at work, for your engagement. And I would suggest that it's up to all of us. So what we have done in our organization is we've used this for the positional leaders, but don't ever give an employee engagement survey without also asking these questions. Have you clarified with your leader what's expected? In the last 7 days, have you given recognition or praise to your colleagues? Does your supervisor know that you care about them as a person? Is there someone at work that you encourage in their development? Does your own personal purpose make you feel that your job is important? Have you taken the time to create a good friendship? In the last year, have you created opportunities to learn and to grow? It shifts it from an external orientation where you're expecting your boss to do it for you to say, no, I'm responsible for my engagement too. Whatever I expect, I need to give. And this is what we call the law of the echo. Whatever we give out will come back to us. But let's take that personal responsibility. Okay. So George Bernard Shaw, in summary of this philosophy, this is the true joy of life, the being used for a purpose, recognized by yourself as a mighty one, the being a force of nature. And my parents would love this guy. He's a Irish playwright. Being a force of nature instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. My parents would love that. That's the generation that we come from. Are you a force of nature? Are you a giver in your organization? Can people count on you? This is something to take an inventory on. Now, just to wrap this first section up, and then I'm going to get into the process where we actually get into the conversations. I'm going to show you a little video. It's one of my favorites that shows the power of ownership. And this is a force of nature. It's a movie film that was filmed in India. It's only a couple minutes here. And it's a story about a tree that falls on the road and how do people respond to it. Now watch a child become a force of nature. Enjoy.
सर आपके लिए उस पार कार का इंतजाम किया है सर आइए सर ये चल चल जाओ बोल रहा क्या बात करता है क्या ऊपर से जाएगा क्या ऊपर से जा जा
गया मेन शो
I hate this country. कुछ करो ना.
अब मैं वहां जाके क्या उखाड़ लूंगा.
कैसी जाने बूंदे आई जाने कैसा दर्द लाई सामने क्या है ये तेरे क्यों रुका है तू बता रे हो कौन तुझको पार लेगा कौन होगा वो मसीहा जिसे तू ढूंढता है वो ही है तू वही है तुझ में तेरा रास्ता है तुझ में तेरा है सहारा तू ही तुझको पार लेगा तू ही है तेरा किनारा रास्ता है, तुझ में तेरा है सहारा, तू ही तुझको पार लेगा, तू ही है तेरा किनारा। जिसे ढूंढता है तू ही रे, तू ही रे, तू ही रे तेरा मसीहा हो।
I love that video. Love that video. All right. So there's a little inspiration. Raquel Platten, like a small boat on the ocean, sending big waves into motion, like how a single word can make a heart open. I might only have one match, but I can make an explosion. All right. So what the philosophy of accountability does is it gives you respect from knowing that you can be counted on. It gives you joy from being a true force of nature. Look at the joy in that kid, right? And it gives you fulfillment from being generous, from saying, I'm going to, instead of waiting for somebody else to do it for me, I am going to take responsibility. Now, this sets the stage now for the next stage, for the next part of the presentation. Oh, by the way, I forgot this slide was in here. Nature is by nature internally oriented. It's been said that a bird sitting on a branch is never afraid of the branch breaking. That's because her trust is not in the branch, but it's in her wings. And this is the job of leaders, is to create cultures where the strength comes from within, leadership in the home and leadership in the workplace. Now let's talk about the process of how to do that. So just be aware, whenever you're working with a process, it's always looking in the mirror first and say, am I contributing to the frustration that I'm having right now? How am I contributing to the very problem that I complain about? What's my part of the problem here, right? Everyone on a team knows who and who is not performing, and they're looking to you as a leader to see what you're going to do about it. It is a positional leader's responsibility to do something about it, to do something about performance, and to do something about when agreements aren't being met. Now, there's three main causes that a person fails to meet your expectations. I can't come up with any other reasons why people fail to meet your expectations. They're unaware of the expectations, in which case leaders are accountable to communicate these expectations. Number two, there's a lack of required skill or capacity. Leaders are accountable to assess the willingness, capacity, and the resources that are available. If those resources aren't there, don't expect people to make an agreement to do something if the resources aren't there, or they choose not to. And leaders are accountable to ensure the right people are on the team. Folks, the easiest way to get an accountable team is to hire accountable people, and to have in the hiring process a measurement of how we know when people are accountable. And you ask the question, I mean, this isn't a hiring presentation, but these questions like, where in your life did you learn to be accountable? What does accountability mean to you? Where's your value of accountability tested? And to really assess this. Now, you're not going to necessarily get it in an interview, but this is something you have to hire for. You have to hire for this attitude. It's like when I was doing a retreat with a board down in San Francisco some time ago, and we had great customer service through the whole experience. And when we were checking out, I asked the clerk, I said, do you guys all get good training in customer service training consistently? And she thought about it for a while, and then for a minute, and then she said, well, actually, you can't train somebody to be nice. What we do is that we hire nice people and train them to use the computer. And accountability is kind of like that. You can't really train somebody to be accountable. You can foster it, but you got to start with accountability. Now, many of us aren't in the position of we didn't necessarily hire our entire team, and so we have what we have. But that's ultimately the best way to do this, is to really get the right people on the bus, right? So there's three barriers to accountability in terms of following through on agreements. One is ambiguity, that usually comes from busyness, over busyness. We're so busy, we don't stop and get really clear with each other. What actually are we expecting from each other? Politeness, where we're too nice to people. And this is typical of Canadian organizations. We're Canadian after all, and we're too nice. because we don't want to disrupt or hurt people. But it will be a barrier to accountability. And sometimes when you get a culture of niceness, you get a blockage in accountability. And I know that from my own environment. And then you get entitlement, which is all about self-centeredness, will be a barrier to accountability. So let's look at how we overcome that. If you are feeling frustrated and you're blaming and you want to, how do I punish this person? How do I just don't know, how can I, this is what I call a downstream problem. And what we need to do is to do the upstream work. So what I've done here is that I have a checklist, upstream checklist, and it's going to turn into a process for how you manage these conversations. But make sure the downstream process is a last resort. And these are all upstream. This is really an upstream process, which is the power of clarity. And I always say that there's clarity in every one of these points. And I always say, you don't really need to get tougher with people. What you need to do is get clearer with people. The toughness comes from a lack of clarity, a lack of explaining expectations. So ambiguity leads to mediocrity. You've got to be very precise in your relationships, precise in your expectations, your support requirements, your agreements. So I'll go through these one at a time, as it's a bit of a checklist, but there's a transformational quality that I want you to experience in here. We're going to go through the first one first. First of all, how's your connection? So if you're dealing with a difficult conversation that you have to have, that you're not getting the expectations, the first thing you want to ask is, how's the quality of that relationship? When parents used to come in and they would have a list of things for me to do to fix the kid, whether it was a lack of motivation or not attending school or whatever it was, my response is, the child was not meeting your expectations. How much time do you invest with that child when you're not expecting anything? And inevitably, really troubled families always had zero. They don't talk to their kids unless they need something from them. And this transfers into the workplace. How often do we actually talk and value and listen to our team members before we have something that we expect from them? Connect before you expect. How's that relationship? So it comes back to the deposits and the withdrawals. Don't try to have tough conversations with people. Don't try to build accountability with people when you're in the red. It's just like, you got to make a deposit before you make a withdrawal. And maybe the action that comes out of this is to say, where do I need to make some deposits into a relationship, right? Here's some examples of deposits: displaying kindness, encouragement, catching people doing things right, keeping promises, showing loyalty, apologizing, being present. These are ways that you make deposits. And maybe what needs to happen at this stage is to really take the time to invest in some relationships. And again, busyness becomes a barrier to this because we're not connecting enough with people. And you will always have an accountability issue if you're not connected. And I got to say, it's a whole lot easier to have these conversations, these tough conversations with people, when you're connected to them and when you've invested in that. So maybe you've done your part and you can check that box, but make sure that you assess that very carefully. Number two, do they have a reason to be accountable? Nobody wants to just come to work and be accountable. Nobody wants to come to their life and just be accountable. There has to be a reason. Accountability, whether it's understanding that being accountable gives you energy, gives you self-respect, gives you respect for others. What's the vision of accountability that you have? And I come back to my whole notion of ikigai, which is authentic alignment. If people are connected to their gifts and their passion and their contribution, and are spending the time at work, and I always say, fit people, don't fix people. Where people are in that middle circle, where they're really expressing their gifts and their passion and their contribution, they are far more likely to be accountable. Just like if you're connected to people, they're going to be far more accountable, far more apt to be accountable if you know what's going on in their life and you have those relationships built. When people are what I call aligned authentically, and this is where accountability can become very transformational. as a way of saying, listen, I'm not getting the results that I need from you. Where are you at in terms of your gifts and your passion and your contribution? And very often people fail in their accountability because they're not that aligned, I remember doing some coaching. I was referred by a CEO some time ago, and and the CEO had asked me, would you assess whether or not this person's in the right position or not? They're not getting the results that they want. He's not coming through on what I'm expecting from him. And I want you to assess whether or not he is in the right position. And he just did nothing but complain the entire first 10 minutes of the session. He complained about the younger generation. They don't have a work ethic. They're just not. And I said, listen, do you care? And he said, well, of course I care. And then he went on and ranted again about the results that weren't coming through. No, I said, what do you mean? I said, you're not answering the question. I said, do you care about what they go home to? Do you care about whether they're finding their gifts at work, whether they're finding their passion at work? Nobody's going to be accountable if they're not finding their passion. And he says, no, I don't really care about that. And so what we discovered, he was in the wrong role. So he wasn't achieving his accountabilities because he wasn't in a role that fit him. And what he did is he went back to sales. And he was a good salesperson, but they had promoted him to be a sales manager, and he was a terrible manager because it was the wrong fit. And so he needed to go back and do what he did best, which was just, he didn't want to manage people. He cared about the people that he served, but he didn't care about building a team. And that wasn't his strength. So know where you are, know where your fit is, your authentic alignment, right? And this is one way to assess things. We hire people on skills and attitude. What we tend to do is that we hire them on skills and fire them for attitude. So you really want to take the time to assess where people are at. Now, people with high skills and a bad attitude or attitude challenge, people with a great attitude and the skills are role models, potential role models where you got the right attitude, but you got poor skills, and you got energy consumers that will take your energy, that aren't accountable people, that just don't come through on their agreements and don't make clear agreements, and that these are your unaccountable people. And I suggest here that the energy consumers are really people most of the time who are just ill-fitted, and what they need is coaching to either move on, because if there's a place in your organization where they can find a fit, great. But if they can't, maybe you just have to move them on instead of trying to change them and make people accountable. It's hard enough to change ourselves, much less somebody else. And so rather than trying to fix somebody or make somebody accountable or force somebody to accountable through a harder conversation, maybe we just have to accept this is an ill-fitted person and we need to coach them and not consume so much energy. Because as we say, that the whiner is the one that gets all the energy. So that's assessing that fit and making sure that people have a reason to be accountable. When people are aligned with their gifts, they will step up in terms of accountability far more productively. Now, even though you got a good fit, and even though there's a connection, you still have to be clear about what you expect from each other. What are your expectations in terms of how we want your values to be lived here? What behaviors do we expect? And precision leads to excellence. You have to be very precise. And usually when people aren't meeting our expectations, we haven't done the work up front, again, upstream, to make those expectations crystal clear. We send an email to somebody and say, could you get this done as soon as possible? We know what ASAP means, but their expectation of ASP is very different. And so we need to get, and I stress, while you're developing a process for doing this and tightening up your accountability, be a pain in the rear end. Just tell people, I'm going to be really anal about this, and I'm going to nail you and say, okay, I need this back by 4:00 on Wednesday. Is that possible? All right, this is my expectation. And until this becomes integrated into your culture, you need to be extra explicit about this. Okay. What has to happen? Who has to do it, and by when? And so I know that we have Nadine on the call, and Nadine's on a committee that I'm on. We sat through a committee meeting last night. We're starting a project in a nonprofit group where we are organizing a golf tournament for a fundraiser. And so I'm going to be leading this subcommittee along with our executive director. And one of the things that I met with my executive director about was, we didn't tap into enough about what's going to happen, who's going to do it, and by when. And this is just simple project management, I understand, but it's the kind of thing that we slide over if we don't take the time and be firm. Again, you don't have to be hard. You don't have to be rude about it. You don't have to be disrespectful, but you've got to be clear so that we know exactly what we're dealing with. And take responsibility. Hey, listen, I got to take responsibility for my part of that problem, right? And then agreements. What are our promises to each other? Now, you cannot have accountability without agreements. A request is not an agreement. Just because you send somebody an email, just because you ask for something, that doesn't mean that there's an agreement. And you got to we all got to take responsibility to be very clear that we actually get an agreement back. Yes, I will do that by 4 o'clock on Thursday. Yes, I will have that project done by Friday next week, by end of day. Can I count on you to do that? And again, it feels a little anal, but if you're going to sharpen up your accountabilities, we need to get sharp in terms of the promises. And then you send a confirming email afterwards that summarizes, this is what I heard in the meeting. This is what I heard you agree to. This is what I agreed to. Is this what we all agreed to? Now, if that promise doesn't come through, then the first line of defense is to say, listen, I take responsibility. I wasn't clear. Apparently, I wasn't clear about my expectations. I made some assumptions. I'm going to try it again. If it happens twice, that's when I begin to say, maybe this person is just simply not the kind of person that I can count on. And then we have to move to the second response, right? Which is consequences. Now, this is always a lot of energy around consequences. And what are consequences? I always start with positive consequences. What are the motivators? One of the motivators for people is we're going to build a good, strong team here. There's going to be self-respect. Now I've worked over the years with people where the motivators are, $1 million in stock options when we produce our results at the end of the year. Most of us don't have those kind of resources, but you can have intrinsic motivators. Maybe it's more flex time. What matters to you? And that you, in the beginning of a conversation around accountability, what really matters to you? And when you deliver on these results, we can help you achieve those whatever is important to you. And that we have a culture here where you can tell us what's important. Now, maybe flex time is important. Maybe getting development opportunities is important. Maybe just getting me off your back is important to you, so I'm not hounding you all the time. And then what results will we have from our choices? So those are positive consequences. And I always start with positive consequences, which is another word for that, or what motivates you. But if that doesn't come through, there will be negative consequences. And maybe the negative consequences is, ultimately, we'd like to say you can be fired, but that maybe we're a long way off from that. And maybe we're in an organization, maybe you got a union environment that you just don't have the leverage and the ability to fire people quickly when you need to. And when we have people, and we've done all this, we've made the connection, we've assessed the fit, we've explained expectations, we talk about support requirements. And by the way, I think I missed support requirement. What is expected on your side of the partnership? This is a partnership relationship. I forgot to outline support requirements. It's an important one that we often forget, actually. What do you need from me to achieve those results? What do I need from you? What do you need from me? Let's come up with an agreement together. This is what locks us together. Maybe you've done all that. Maybe you've gotten clear agreements and you still have the wrong person and in the job, and you need to let them go. Maybe firing is not an option. Maybe, and I always say, Peter Drucker, I learned, hire slowly, fire quickly. If people are in the wrong role, maybe they need to move on, but maybe move on. And maybe you don't have the luxury of being able to do that. There are other consequences. You're just not going to be a member of this team. And what I always say is maybe we just have to cut off their oxygen supply so that their negative energy and lack of accountability doesn't contaminate the rest of the culture, and let the culture build, let the accountable people get reinforced as role models to build that culture, assuming that you've done everything else prior to that. As a last resort, you do have to talk about negative consequences. Listen, you've agreed to do this 3 times and you haven't come through. What's the deal here? And go back. Do you not feel like you get support here? Do you not have the resources? What is going on? Because we expect you to be accountable. It's part of our culture here. And that you really have those, that's the hard conversation about what's going on here. And what is it that, have I not been clear enough with you? And maybe maybe what you draw out of them is, listen, they don't have the resources to do that. And then you negotiate that and you see what's legitimate. Anyway, what I'd love to do is to stay on the call after, and we can kind of iron this out through some discussion. The last point is what we call an evergreen plan. What is our process that's going to keep these agreements aside? Now, I just had a conversation. We had our meeting last night with our team, our subcommittee, and I had a conversation with the executive director before this call here. And we said, listen, we're going to meet every week. We're going to plan. We're going to make this a collaborative effort. And Paul and I are going to meet every week and assign, and outline what's involved. We're going to meet weekly. Generally speaking, when you're on a project, you need to meet weekly. We all, whatever that is, you decide together, and some people call it a satisfaction plan. How satisfied are we with our deliverables right now? Are you getting what you want? Am I getting what I want? Am I meeting your expectations? Are you meeting my expectations? And that you really iron that out. How often do we need to meet to make sure that we achieve our results and that we're moving toward the plan that we had originally agreed to? Along with that, we need to always have a recovery process. Every time you make a promise to someone, you have a creditor. And sometimes when that process breaks down, and maybe you're depending on somebody else, maybe what it means is that you need to stop and say, listen, let your creditor know as soon as you know that your agreement has been jeopardized. For whatever reason, negotiate with your creditor at this point to minimize the damages and recommit to a new agreement and learn from your experience so that it doesn't happen again. This is what an accountant, you don't have to be perfect to be accountable. What you have to say is be real clear and notice, oh boy, I'm not going to be able to deliver that. I told my boss I'd have that on her desk at 4:00 on Friday. And, maybe I had a personal challenge in my own life. Maybe one of my parents was sick that I needed to attend to that took a priority over this. And I need to get back and say, this is where things are at right now. So folks, this is probably all stuff we know. We just need to be reminded to sharpen this a little bit, to tighten it up a little bit. This is the upstream checklist. Make the connection, assess the fit, get real clear on expectations, support requirements, what's expected on your side of the partnership, make those clear agreements, have clear consequences, and a plan to follow up. And so in closing, what I just want to leave you with is a call to action. And that is, here's some options for you. Assess your own integrity gaps and make a plan to close those gaps. Look at what's important in your life right now that you're not attending to, and you will find an integrity gap. Maybe it's, I want to make better relationships. Maybe I want to improve my health. Maybe I want to spend more time with my kids. Maybe I want, whatever it is that you espouse and claim to value, but that you are not attending to. And assess very clearly and precisely what it is that needs attention, and then turn that into an agreement with yourself. And then find an accountability agreement, an accountability partner that you can partner with that will help support you and hold you accountable for that. And maybe that's what comes out of this presentation for you. And I'm going to tell you, if you become more personally accountable to yourself, that will spill over into your team. We are one indivisible whole, as Gandhi used to say. We are not just compartmentalized in our life. And so anywhere in your life that you get more integrity, that will impact the energy that you bring to your work. Carefully observe your own orientation. Decide once and for all that all blame is a waste of time and your life will change forever. Ask yourself how you can be a force of nature. How am I contributing to this problem that I'm trying to solve, that I expect other people to solve? How am I contributing to this? Maybe it's my lack of clarity. Maybe it's my lack of support. Maybe it's my lack of connection. Maybe I'm not investing enough in that relationship. Maybe I haven't really assessed carefully what this individual's value, what their values are, and what their own personal vision, what matters to them personally. And I need to connect their work more to their personal life. Whatever that is, look at what your part of that is. Let you be a force of nature. Paint a picture of the accountable mindset with your team. Take any of this material. Please feel free to use it. And I would give you any support at all to carry this work forward. Brainstorm how you can work together to stay out of the victim box. What do we need from each other so that each other holds each other accountable for staying out of the victim box? It's not just up to the boss to hammer people. We can do this together because none of us want to work inside the victim box, not in a civil organization. And again, you might want to assess, maybe the values in this organization don't fit for me and I need to move on. That's another action that you might take. Tell the story. If you want to build accountability in your culture, before every meeting, tell the story where someone on your team was accountable. And celebrate the success. Really shine a light on it to keep reinforcing it so that you build on the positive. Not that, it's not like you build it with a, as I say, with a flashlight, not a stick, where you're walking around telling people when they're not accountable. And do the upstream checklist. Invest in relationship. Assess fit, and clarify very clearly what are your expectations, agreements, consequences, and an evergreen plan. So on that note, folks, up next, again, we haven't gotten clear. We're in the same process for those of you who were here last time on a renewal process for our Leadership Academy in the spring. So look forward to that. And we're also doing a fundraiser, which we will know more about. I'll make an agreement with you. We'll know more about it by our next webinar for Jasper in the upcoming year. We do know that we are going to have it in February. And so we're going to start to roll that out. Feel free to reach out to me if I can support you in any way. There's my email address. Our next webinar is on November 22nd, same time, psychological safety. It starts with personal responsibility. We're going to give you a little bit of a different bent, perhaps, on psychological safety than you've heard before. So on that note, I am going to stop recording.